Thank you for inviting me to this Lit Fest. This is a very specific topic I've been asked to speak on. And this topic that I've been asked to speak on is the lessons of the Mahabharata for the modern world. So you've got three words or three expressions in that title that's been assigned to me: lessons, the Mahabharata, and the modern world. So let me take these one at a time. First, let us talk about the Mahabharata. All of us have impressions about the Mahabharata. We may have impressions about the Mahabharata on the basis of what we have seen in a TV serial. We have impressions about the Mahabharata on the basis of Amar Chitra Katha. We may have impressions about the Mahabharata on the basis of an abridged translation that someone has done. We may form an impression about the Mahabharata from a translation that someone has done of the Sanskrit Mahabharata, and we may form an impression of the Mahabharata from regionals' retellings of the Mahabharata. So, before one even begins to ask this question about lessons, let us be clear about which Mahabharata. The original Sanskrit Mahabharata was composed by Veda Vyasa, Krishna Dvaipayan Veda Vyasa. To learn lessons from the Sanskrit Mahabharata, one should obviously read the unabridged Mahabharata that was composed by Krishna Dvaipayan Veda Vyasa. Without doing that, if we resort to abridged versions, we will tend to oversimplify. Oh, the Kauravas were bad, oh, the Pandavas were good. That is oversimplification. From any kind of oversimplification, I cannot expect to understand any lesson. So, whether it is the Sanskrit or a translation that I am reading, any lesson to be properly imbibed has to be from the unabridged version. Krishna Dvaipayan Veda Vyasa composed the Mahabharata in 100,000 shlokas. There is an Oriental Research Institute known as the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune. Between the years 1916 and 1966, over a period of 50 years, it sat through more than 1200 different versions of the Sanskrit Mahabharata that existed in different parts of India. And yes, there were about 1200 different versions of the Sanskrit Mahabharata that existed in India with very minor differences. Did Veda Vyasa dictate to Ganesha who wrote it down? Or did he not dictate? Those kinds of minor differences. On the basis of this, the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, BORI for short, produced the critical edition of the Mahabharata. The critical edition of the Mahabharata has 80,000 shlokas. I have done a translation of the Mahabharata in 10 volumes, which is probably the reason why I have been invited to this Lit Fest. That 10-volume translation of the Mahabharata runs into 2.25 million words. So you can imagine the size of the Mahabharata. Every incident that we are familiar with may or may not exist in Bori's critical edition. And Bori's critical edition has been criticized on grounds of commission, more often on grounds of omission. Why did you leave this out? Why did you leave that out? So the Mahabharata should be defined as 80,000 shlokas or 100,000 shlokas. Why am I saying this? What is the Mahabharata? Most people think that the Mahabharata is a story of a battle that was fought on the fields of Kurukshetra, Dharmashetra, Kurukshetra between the Kurus and the Pandavas. That's a very, very small part of the Mahabharata. About one-third of the Mahabharata is on geography. About one-third of the Mahabharata is on dharma. Not just moksha dharma, which is the dharma of liberation and emancipation. So is this lesson only supposed to be the lesson that Arjuna imbibed from Dronacharya when Dronacharya asked him to focus only on the bird's eye? Of course not. So we have to define the Mahabharata, and properly interpreted lessons can only be gleaned and derived from the complete unabridged Mahabharata. Modern world. What is so very modern about this world? Have human beings changed? Have they developed wings? Have we now got 10 legs? Do we no longer need to eat? Has sexual reproduction disappeared? No. So human beings today are as human beings were many years ago when the Mahabharata was composed. The Mahabharata was not composed at one particular point in time. It is difficult to be precise, but roughly speaking, because there was a process of oral telling, retelling, rendering down through a Guru Shishya tradition, the Mahabharata was composed roughly over, not written down, written would be a wrong word to use, was composed roughly over a period of 1000 years, from something like 500 BCE to 500 CE. Over roughly 1000 years. Compared to that, which let us say is 3000 years ago, have human beings changed? No. Modernity only means advancements in technology and some knowledge in science. Knowledge in science has always been incremental, so fundamentally it's about technology. But all of that technology has not made us robots. Maybe that day will come. So therefore, the lessons from the modern world are no different from the lessons for 1000 years ago. In Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan's introduction to his translation of the principal Upanishads, he said something very similar. Then what is this? What do you mean by modern world? The reason the Mahabharata resonates with us even today is because even 2000 years ago, people were very similar, human beings were very similar. They faced the same dilemmas. They had the same kind of problems in relationships. That is why the expression modern world is completely superfluous, except to the extent that in this modern world, we don't have time for anything. That is the only modern bit. So we don't have time to read 100,000 shlokas. We don't have time to read 80,000 shlokas. So you must tell me like 2-minute instant noodles. You must tell me in 2 minutes the lessons from the Mahabharata. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. Now we come to lessons. The question to ask here is lessons for whom? As I said, the Mahabharata is about dharma. Now, dharma means different things to different people. There is a huge section of the Mahabharata known as Shanti Parva where Bhishma is lying down on his bed of arrows and is teaching Yudhishthira. A large part of Shanti Parva is what is called Raja Dharma Parva. Raja Dharma Parva is the dharma for kings. So there are lessons for kings. Today that king would be the government. So the lessons for the king or the government are not only there in Kautilya's Arthashastra, they are also there in the Rajadharma section of the Mahabharata or in Shanti Parva. So there are those kinds of lessons. There are people who are trying to be liberated from the cycle of worldly existence, samsara. For them there is moksha dharma. So obviously the Mahabharata has significant sections on moksha dharma for those people. And remember, the Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata, so there are lessons for them. And there is the ordinary individual who is a grihastha, a householder. He has not retired to the forest, has not got to the stage of vanaprastha. He has not become a sannyasi. He has not resorted to sannyas. He is a grihastha, householder. Today also people are householders just as they were 3000 years ago. So there are lessons for the householder and there is a template that is described of. The word dharma is very difficult to translate. I've used dharma in the context of moksha dharma earlier. But there is a template of what a householder should do in terms of the pursuit of dharma, artha, and kama. So those are lessons for the individual. Similarly, there are lessons for the community about what the community should do. So for people who are not pursuing moksha dharma, lessons for the king, lessons for the community, lessons for the individual. What are those lessons? Well, I've already answered that in a way. To understand what those lessons are, one should read the complete Mahabharata. The lesson cannot be derived from the fact that so and so laughed at Duryodhana. That is a gross simplification. It does not do justice to the Mahabharata. Thank you once again for having invited me.